January 23, 1968, 2:30 p.m., 25 miles off the coast of North Korea. Commander Lloyd Pete Booker stood on the bridge of the USS Pueblo, watching 4 North Korean torpedo boats circling his ship. 2 MiG-21 fighters screamed overhead at low altitude. The radio crackled with demands in broken English. "Heave to, or we will open fire." The Pueblo was a spy ship, an aging cargo vessel hastily converted for signals intelligence collection. Her mission? Intercept North Korean communications, monitor radar frequencies, gather classified intelligence on one of America's most secretive enemies. But she was unarmed. 2 machine guns. That was it. No destroyer escorts, no air cover, no backup within 500 miles. Booker tried to stall, tried to maneuver, tried to buy time for his crew to destroy the mountains of classified equipment and documents packed into the ship's cramped intelligence spaces. Then the North Koreans opened fire. Machine gun rounds tore through the Pueblo's thin hull. 1 crew member, fireman Dwayne Hodges, was killed instantly. Commander Booker was wounded. 3 others were hit. With capture inevitable, Booker made a decision that would haunt the Navy for decades. He surrendered. The USS Pueblo, a commissioned U.S. Navy vessel, was boarded by a foreign power for the first time since the War of 1812. 83 Americans were taken prisoner, tortured for 11 months, forced to sign false confessions, and the classified materials aboard, the cryptographic equipment, the code books that could unlock thousands of encrypted U.S. military communications. All captured, all compromised, all handed to North Korea and through them to the Soviet Union and China. This is the story of the USS Pueblo. The Navy encounter that was so humiliating, so catastrophic that large portions remain classified 57 years later. The ship that's still held by a foreign power. And the intelligence disaster the Pentagon has been trying to bury ever since. To understand the Pueblo incident, you need to understand what the ship really was. In 1967, the Navy took an aging freight ship, built in 1944, and converted it into a signals intelligence collector. The official designation, environmental research ship. The real purpose, spy on North Korea. The conversion was rushed, cheap. The Pueblo was packed with sophisticated electronic eavesdropping equipment, the latest NSA gear for intercepting radio communications and radar signals. But the ship itself was barely seaworthy. She had 1-screw propulsion, a top speed of 12 knots, 2 .50 caliber machine guns that had been left in storage and were covered in cosmoline, thick grease that would take hours to remove before they could be fired. Commander Booker was a first-time captain. The Pueblo was his first command. Most of his crew were young sailors, many in their late teens or early 20s. The intelligence detachment aboard included NSA civilians and Navy cryptologists responsible for operating the classified equipment. The mission was part of Operation Click Beetle, a signals intelligence gathering program targeting North Korea. The Pueblo would steam along the coast just outside North Korea's territorial waters, intercept communications, and report back. It was supposed to be routine. Low risk. The Navy had conducted similar missions dozens of times with other ships like the USS Banner without incident. But January 1968 wasn't routine. Tensions on the Korean peninsula were at a breaking point. Just 2 days before the Pueblo set sail, North Korean commandos had crossed into South Korea and attempted to assassinate President Park Chung-hee at the Blue House, Seoul's presidential residence. The raid failed, but dozens were killed in firefights throughout the city. North Korea was in an aggressive mood, and the Pueblo was about to become their trophy. On January 23, 1968, the Pueblo was steaming about 25 miles off the North Korean coast, well outside the 12-mile territorial limit. At approximately 12 p.m., a North Korean submarine chaser appeared on the horizon. It circled the pueblo, signaling for identification. Booker complied. The submarine chaser departed. Booker thought the encounter was over, but at 1:45 p.m., 4 North Korean torpedo boats appeared. Then 2 MiG-21 fighters overhead. The torpedo boats circled aggressively. One ran up signal flags demanding, "Heave to or I will open fire." Booker realized the situation was deteriorating. He ordered the crew to begin emergency destruction of classified materials. They started throwing documents overboard, smashing equipment with axes and sledgehammers, burning code books in the incinerators. But there was too much. Tons of classified equipment, hundreds of pounds of documents. Destruction was supposed to take hours in controlled conditions. They had minutes. The North Koreans opened fire. Machine gun rounds ripped through the Pueblo's superstructure. Fireman Dwayne Hodges was hit in the abdomen. He died minutes later, the only American killed during the capture. Booker tried to maneuver, tried to escape, but the Pueblo's top speed was 12 knots. The North Korean torpedo boats could do 40, and the MiGs overhead could sink the ship with a single rocket. At 2:30 p.m., after 2 hours of maneuvering and stalling, Booker made the decision. He ordered all stop. He would surrender rather than risk the lives of his entire crew. North Korean commandos boarded the Pueblo. They took Commander Booker and his crew prisoner. And then they took inventory of what they'd captured. The intelligence haul was catastrophic. When the Pueblo's crew attempted to destroy classified materials, they failed. Not because they didn't try, but because the ship wasn't properly equipped for emergency destruction. The incinerators were too small. The weighted bags used to sink documents in the ocean weren't properly prepared. The axes and sledgehammers couldn't destroy sophisticated electronic equipment quickly enough. When North Korean forces boarded, they found cryptographic equipment, KW-7, KWR-37, and KG-14 crypto machines, devices used to encrypt and decrypt classified U.S. military communications. Code books. The Pueblo was carrying current cryptographic key lists for January, February, and March 1968. But more damaging, they also had superseded key lists for November and December 1967 that should have been destroyed weeks earlier. Classified documents, operational plans, intelligence reports, communications logs, personnel records identifying which crew members were NSA cryptologists. The ship itself, a treasure trove of U.S. Navy technology, communications equipment, and operational procedures. A declassified National Security Agency report stated that the cryptographic loss from the Pueblo would dwarf anything in previous U.S. cryptologic history. Think about what that means. The North Koreans, and through them the Soviets and Chinese, could now read U.S. military communications sent during November and December 1967. Over 117,000 classified messages were potentially compromised. They could study American cryptographic systems, learn how to break future codes, understand U.S. military procedures and operational patterns. And all of it happened because an inadequately defended spy ship was sent into hostile waters with insufficient destruction capabilities. The Navy immediately changed all compromised codes, altered communication procedures, assumed every message sent in those months had been read by the enemy. But the damage was done, and it was catastrophic. The 82 surviving crew members Dwayne Hodges had died during capture were taken to Pyongyang. They were imprisoned in a compound, and the torture began. For 11 months, the crew endured beatings, starvation, sleep deprivation, psychological torture. The North Koreans wanted confessions, wanted the Americans to admit on camera that the Pueblo had violated North Korean territorial waters. that they were spies, that they deserved punishment. At first, the crew resisted. They refused to sign confessions, refused to cooperate with propaganda efforts. So the North Koreans escalated. They beat Commander Booker in front of his crew, threatened to execute crew members one by one until Booker signed a confession, subjected them to Hell Week, 7 days of continuous beatings. Eventually, under threat of death, the crew signed false confessions, appeared in staged propaganda videos, read scripted statements admitting guilt, but they also rebelled in small ways. During photo shoots, crew members would casually raise their middle fingers, telling the North Koreans it was the Hawaiian good luck sign. The North Koreans, unfamiliar with the gesture, allowed it. The photos were published in propaganda materials worldwide. When the North Koreans finally learned what the gesture meant, they punished the entire crew with another week of beatings. The United States tried to negotiate. Diplomatic talks at Panmunjom dragged on for months. The Johnson administration considered military responses, a naval blockade, airstrikes, even nuclear options. But with the Tet Offensive raging in Vietnam, there were no good options. Finally, on December 23, 1968, exactly 11 months after capture, a deal was reached. The United States would issue a formal apology, admit the Pueblo had violated North Korean waters, which it hadn't, pledge to never conduct similar operations again. In exchange, the crew would be released. The U.S. negotiators signed the apology, then immediately retracted it publicly. A diplomatic fiction, but it secured the crew's freedom. On December 23rd, the 82 surviving crew members walked across the bridge of no return at Panmunjom, one by one, carrying the body of Dwayne Hodges. They were flown home on Christmas Eve, malnourished, scarred, traumatized, but alive. The crew came home as heroes, but the Navy immediately launched a court of inquiry. Commander Booker was recommended for court-martial. The charges? Surrendering his ship without fighting, failing to complete destruction of classified material, permitting the ship to be captured. The inquiry board acknowledged Booker had maintained crew morale during captivity, that he had provided leadership, but they wanted him prosecuted anyway. Secretary of the Navy John Chafee rejected the recommendation. "They have suffered enough," he said. No one was court-martialed. No one was held accountable. The incident was swept aside. But the Navy couldn't hide the truth. The Pueblo incident was one of the most humiliating defeats in modern naval history. Large portions of the incident remain classified. The full extent of the intelligence loss has never been publicly disclosed. Documents related to the Pueblo are still being withheld by the National Archives, 57 years later. And the ship, the USS Pueblo, is still commissioned, still officially part of the U.S. Navy fleet. She's the second oldest commissioned ship in service. But she's not in American waters. She's in North Korea, permanently docked in Pyongyang, a tourist attraction, a trophy, a museum celebrating North Korea's victory over the United States. The only U.S. Navy ship currently held by a foreign power. Today, the surviving crew members are in their 70s and 80s. They meet occasionally, remember their ordeal, fight for recognition that was denied them for decades. They weren't awarded prisoner of war medals until 1990, 22 years after their release, because the Navy initially classified them as illegally detained rather than POWs. In 2021, a federal judge ruled they were entitled to $2.3 billion in damages from the North Korean government. But the funds to pay those damages have never materialized. The Pueblo incident taught the Navy painful lessons. Ships conducting intelligence operations near hostile nations now have adequate defensive armaments, better destruction capabilities, closer support from other vessels. But the fundamental question remains unanswered. Why was the Pueblo sent into those waters so inadequately prepared? Why was an unarmed ship conducting intelligence operations 25 miles from one of the most hostile nations on Earth? And why, 57 years later, are portions of the incident still classified? Because the truth is too embarrassing. Because the intelligence loss was too catastrophic. Because acknowledging the full extent of the failure would damage the Navy's reputation. The USS Pueblo sits in Pyongyang, a permanent reminder of the day the U.S. Navy surrendered a commissioned vessel without firing a shot. The encounter they tried to remove from history. The ship they'll never get back. And the intelligence disaster they've been covering up for over half a century. If this story showed you how intelligence failures get buried, if you believe those Pueblo crew members deserve full recognition and compensation, if you think 57-year-old incidents should be fully declassified, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel, because there are more stories like this, more intelligence disasters, more incidents the Navy wants forgotten, more truths buried in classified files. The USS Pueblo is still sitting in North Korea, still commissioned, still officially part of the U.S. Navy. And the full truth about what happened? That's still classified. We're going to find it. One declassified document at a time.